Motivated every day. Happy terrific Tuesday, champions. I used to make my worst decisions under pressure, not because I lacked intelligence or experience or values, because under sustained cognitive stress, the pressure of a deadline, a difficult conversation, bills stacking up, something in my thinking would narrow. The options that I had that were clearly available in my calmer moments would become invisible whenever I was under this cognitive stress load. The nuanced response that I knew was right would lose ground to the reactive one that I felt most urgent about. I spent years attributing this to weakness of my character. And so I took the understanding of the neuroscience of cortisol, champions, to realize that it was not a character problem, champions. It was a biological one. And champions, as you always hear me say, biological problems have biological solutions. And so here is the mechanism that you really were never taught. When cortisol rises under psychological stress, champions, it preferentially activates the amygdala, that small almond-shaped part of the brain, which is the brain's threat detection and emotional reactivity center, champions. And while simultaneously, it's reducing the activity of the prefrontal cortex, the brain region that's most responsible for logical reasoning, impulse control, working memory, and nuanced, specialized decision making. And see, this is the biological basis of what researchers call cognitive narrowing under stress, champions. The amygdala, that lovely amygdala, under cortisol activation, it gets going and it begins to override the prefrontal cortex's ability to regulate. And when it overrides the prefrontal cortex's regulatory functionality, it produces the reactive tunnel vision impairment that we were talking about. The decision you make in that state is not your best decision, champions. It is your most cortisol compromised decision, and your choices will reflect that. And if your HPA axis is chronically activated, champions, if you are running elevated cortisol most of the day, well, your prefrontal cortex is operating in a state of chronic partial suppression, champions. Think about that. Your best thinking, your very best thinking is being systematically impaired by the very stress response that is supposed to protect you, champions. And it will reflect in life as those decisions continue to compound. And then we find that more stressful situations come up and it's a consistent repeat. Well, this is why brilliant, experienced, value-driven people make poor decisions when they're under pressure, champions. It's not because they forgot their values, no. It's because their actual neurobiology temporarily overrode their cognition, champions. And when the neurobiology overrides the cognition, this becomes a problem. You work and resolve and operate at a lower level than what you know you're capable of. And this champions, this is the Tuesday performance conversation that most leadership development never has with you, because it requires acknowledging that your decision-making capability and your decision-making quality is a function of your cortisol state, not just your character. So a lot of the judgments that people want to use as a control mechanism does not apply if you understand this information I'm sharing with you. And so on this wonderful week 9 of the cortisol blend, we're calling this the cortisol cognitive blend. So the Rosea, we're going to use 500 milligrams of 3% rosavins and 1% celedracide plus holy basil, what some people also call Tulsi. We'll use 500 milligrams standardized extract because the Rhodiola always will modulate that cortisol, specifically under sustained cognitive load, champions. preventing the progressive cortisol elevation that happens, and you start to narrow your prefrontal cortex, and then it becomes even harder to think as you're moving across this demanding workday where you want to be your best consistently. The Tulsi will step in. It will normalize the HPA axis rhythm, and in that way it will produce what we call the clarity of Shen in traditional Chinese medicine, which is the neurological state in which the prefrontal cortex is operating from a regulated rather than a cortisol suppressed baseline, champions. And together, your best thinking stays accessible to you upon demand under pressure, not despite stress, but through managed cortisol during the moments of chronic stress. So Rhodiola's mechanism is very specific, champions. It's specific to cognitive performance under load. Very specific. Its rosavins actually activate the stress-resistant proteins that prevent the progressive cortisol elevation that occurs during sustained cognitive work. You know, the type of work that gradually impairs your afternoon decision-making quality, even when no single acute stressor has triggered an obvious stress response. You just look up and realize, that's not the best decision. I should have made that decision in the morning. That's what's happening at a neurobiological level. This is the cortisol that accumulates invisibly, and it goes across a demanding workday. And the rhodiola specifically prevents its accumulation, champions. And when you combine that with Tulsi's HPA access normalization, champions, here's what you get. It clears the neurological background noise of the chronic cortisol so that the prefrontal cortex's regulatory function can operate from its full capacity, champions. This blend is specifically designed for the person whose most valuable professional asset is the quality of their thinking under pressure. Very important. That's your money. Tuesday's technique, champions. Today's motivated everyday technique is the pre-decision cortisol check, champions. Listen closely to this. This is very important and will make massive change in your life for the better to reach your dreams, your visions, your goals, and your everyday moves. So here's the technique. All right. So before any significant decision today, champions, a client responding to you, a financial choice you need to make, a strategic call, just take 30 seconds to notice your cortisol state. So ask, am I thinking from my prefrontal cortex right now or from my amygdala? The question itself actually activates what's called metacognition, which is a prefrontal function. And it makes a brief yet effective cortisol circuit breaker, break you out of the cortisol chain. Over weeks, this practice that you'll be doing, it trains the habit of checking the biological state before trusting the decision that that biological state produces, champions. So your physician can jump into play and can run an inflammatory panel alongside the cortisol assessment. Elevated HSCRP often co-occurs with HP dysregulation and compounds the prefrontal suppression. So when the HPA axis is dysregulated, you'll be able to see it with the data. When you see both markers that are elevated in your data, the clinical picture of cognitive cortisol impairment becomes very easy to confirm and trackable, champions. Tracking the data. Rhodiola and Tulsi both have documented effects on inflammatory markers alongside their cortisol mechanism. So ask your physician to please include HSCRP in your month 3 baseline panel. Now, real talk, champions. Real talk. Your competitors are making decisions from amygdala activation, and then they're calling it intuition. You are building the biological foundation that makes your prefrontal cortex your actual decision-making model. Not just in theory, champions, but in practice. And under load, when the pressure is the highest, when the pressure is the greatest, that gap is where careers are built or broken. Build it deliberately, champions. This is your time. This is the moment in which you take control. Controlling your cortisol spike is the most important hormone that you can learn to control first. Remember, champions, this is your time. Alignment is the key. Motivation is the motion. The premium lifestyle is the result. Stay motivated every day. Yes.